starting the recording. All right, everyone. So thank you for coming out to Straight from Support. This is a webinar we do here at Fisher Unitech where we take some common support questions or some interesting support questions that we see asked, and we go and we answer them in this webinar. And at the end of the webinar, you guys will have a chance to ask any questions that you have. And you can also shoot us an email or call us in support if you have any additional questions on the stuff covered. This webinar does go up on YouTube. It takes about a month for them to get uploaded, but the webinar episodes from every week do get uploaded on YouTube if you want to see what we talked about in today's episode. So to get started with, my name is Heather Dawe. I'm a senior support engineer here at Fisher Unitech, and I'm the host of Straight from Support. And every week we cover 2 to 3 topics of common support questions that we see come in. So today's questions are, how can I get new Weldment profiles in SOLIDWORKS? And then what are the different permission types in SOLIDWORKS PDM? So we're going to be covering how we can acquire new Weldment profiles if you guys are used to working in the Weldment tool, and we're going to see how we can gather those. And then we're going to look at SOLIDWORKS PDM and the 5 different types of permissions we have in SOLIDWORKS PDM and what we can use those for and how they in turn end up affecting our Vault. All right. And like I said, my name is Heather Dawe. I'm a senior support engineer. I've been working at Fisher Unitech for Fisher Unitech and Dawe that Fisher Unitech acquired for about 4 years now. I specialize in several different areas of SOLIDWORKS, so I have knowledge in simulation and PDM, general SOLIDWORKS questions. I have my CSWE, which means I had to take the Weldment servicing and all of that exam in order to get the certification there. So if you guys have any questions at the end of the webinar, go ahead and ask. I do not have a special guest today, so that means I'll be a little bit less able to check the chat while we're talking, but I'm definitely going to keep an eye on them. And if you have any questions, we should throw it in there. And at minimum, I'm going to cover it in the question and answer session at the end of today's episode. All right, on that note, let's go ahead and jump in and get started with our first topic. Today's first topic is, how can I get new Weldment profiles in SOLIDWORKS? So this is our data set from the What's New of 2019. The What's New of 2020 is going to be coming out soon. We're going to be doing examples of that, but this is a data set from our What's New 2019, and this is a Weldment piece we've taken, and we have several different profiles here used to create this frame. And Weldments are really useful for creating frames. We don't have to draw a specific profile every time and use a suite to go through. It really does that all within our SOLIDWORKS interface. But what if we run into the situation where I've looked in my SOLIDWORKS interface and the profile that I want to use for my Weldment just isn't available, or just isn't, I'm not seeing it right away? What options do I have in order to get additional Weldment profiles in my SOLIDWORKS interface? So we're going to cover 2 ways that we can get our Weldment profiles when working in SOLIDWORKS. The first option we're going to have is we can download additional profiles. SOLIDWORKS comes with these packages of additional Weldment profiles that we can go and we can download and we can import into our Weldment profile library so that we can use them within SOLIDWORKS. And the second option we have, if we've downloaded all of those and we still don't see what we want, we can create our own Weldment profile. And I'm going to walk you through how you can create a unique Weldment profile and use it right within your project using Weldments. But like I said, the first thing we're going to cover, how can I just download additional ones? Where can I find some already pre-cooked downloaded files that I can grab? So we're going to head over to SOLIDWORKS, and I have this conveyor frame, and I want to create a Weldment profile. But when I look at my types, I notice that it doesn't have the type that I'm looking for when I want to create my Weldment. So I go over to SOLIDWORKS Design Library, and I go into the SOLIDWORKS Content option and click on Weldment. And what you guys will see here is there's this set of 9 zip files, and these are additional standards or standards that you already have, but additional files that we can put in the standards that we can download and we can extract and we can add to our Weldment library. So you notice I wanted an ANSI inch, so I hover over the ANSI inch and it says Control-click to download the file. So that's what I do. I go and I Control-click. I go and I Control-click, and it asks me for a location to download the files to. By default, these are in C program files, SOLIDWORKS Corp or SOLIDWORKS Corp year, Lang, English, then Weldment profiles. You can see that up at the top of the screen. So by default, those are located in that location. If yours may be somewhere else, you can always check in your file locations to see where that Weldment profile settings might be loaded. Mine were at my default, so I went and I extracted the file. And what I can see now when I open that file location is that I have this ANSI zip folder. So just like with any zip folder in Windows, I'm going to go ahead and extract that folder, and I'm going to extract it here. And you can see all of the additional Weldment profiles that it's grabbing, and they are SLD-LFP files. These are library part files, and we've downloaded these all. But what I notice is, and this happens a lot, so I wanted to do this on purpose so you guys see what happened. If you notice, it's downloading ANSI inch to ANSI inch. And what that means is when I go into my ANSI inch folder, it's actually inside that already created ANSI inch folder, which I don't want. So I can just drag that up and put it in the top level of the Weldment. That's going to make it top level, combine that old ANSI inch folder with my new ANSI inch folder. And I can see all of these different types that I can now select from. So I have all my different types in my Weldment profile / ANSI inch. So let's go ahead and check it out. So I go to create a new structural member. I'm still going to work in that ANSI inch standard, but now I have all these new types within that standard. And I can look for the type that I was looking for originally, and I was looking for a square tube. And I can pick the size that I want. I have a lot of sizes here. And then I just select my groups in my Weldment, so I can pick all of these legs as the groups that I want to create new Weldment pieces of. So I've now got my 4 structural members. And it's about as easy as that. I now imported that new ANSI inch standard, and I can use it right within my Weldment. And you can do this for any of those 9 standards that we saw when we're looking in the design library. So the first way we learned how to get the new Weldment profiles was just to download them. Remember, over in your design library, you have a lot of SOLIDWORKS content available for you to download under that SOLIDWORKS content ribbon. From the SOLIDWORKS content ribbon, you can go and select Weldment, and it gives these zip files that you can extract and download and get your new standard profiles. But what if I've gone through all of these profiles and I still don't see something that looks like what I want? I have maybe a unique Weldment profile, something specific to my company. What we're going to look at now is how we can create new Weldment profiles. So rather than downloading them, we're going to create our own individual Weldment profile. So once again, I'm in SOLIDWORKS, and I want to create a unique profile for that top frame there. So I'm going to start off by creating a new part, and I'm just using my default template. It really doesn't matter. And I start a sketch on my front plane. I can start a sketch on any plane. I just chose the front plane. And I'm going to create the profile for my Weldment profile. And I use the rectangle with some centering lines just to make my life a little bit easier. These lines are pre-created, and it allowed me to very quickly go in and start defining my part. So I'm going to give it a dimension that gives it a height. So it's going to have a height of 2 inches, and it's 3 and 5 long. I want to give it some thickness, so I'm going to give it 1/8 of an inch thickness. And I'm going to cap the end so it automatically turns into a enclosed shape. I'm just going to add some 1/16 of an inch rounds here so we maybe don't have all of those sharp edges, just so it looks more like a traditional Weldment profile. And then just finish up adding some dimensions that I needed. So I'd need to re-put in that height one, or that length one. And so I have 3 and 5. And now I'm ready to add it to my SOLIDWORKS library. This is the Weldment profile that I want to use. So I'm ready to add it so I can go ahead and use it within my Weldment part. So I'm going to click on the sketch. I need to make sure I click on that sketch and go to File, Save As. And I'm going to save it as a library part. So I'm going to drop down the library part. And I've already bookmarked where my Weldment profiles go. It's in that Lang English Weldment profiles that I talked about earlier. And I created a new standard called Custom Weldment Profiles. And now I'm going to create a new type. So I'm going to create a new type in this Custom Weldment, and it's going to be my angled C channel. So you can see this Weldment kind of looks like a C channel, but it has the angles on it. So I just created a new type. And now I'm going to give it the size information, so what size I want to click on when I'm selecting it. So it's 3 to 5 inches. It is 2 inches tall, and it is 0.125 inches in thickness. And I'm actually going to copy that into my description right here. That way it also appears when I go to create my cut list. That description is there in my cut list, which is just really convenient. I don't have to modify my cut list at all. Okay, I want to make sure that this little L appears there. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes for some reason it doesn't appear in the library. You can always right click and just hit Add to Library. And in that situation, this ensures that your Weldment profile is in the library and you can start using it on your piece. So let's go ahead and check that out. I went back over to my SOLIDWORKS part that I'm creating, this conveyor frame. I'm going to create a new structural member. And this time I'm going to go to my custom Weldment profiles. That angled C channel type, that size I just created is available. And when I select my groups, I can see that it is using my newly created custom Weldment profile. I can turn it over, see if it looks like what I want it to. And that's all I had to do. I was able to create that. I was able to very easily add it into my conveyor frame piece. So for this first section, we've covered 2 things. We've covered downloading by going over to our right-hand panel, going to SOLIDWORKS content, and control clicking to extract the zip file to our Weldment profile location. We also created a new Weldment profile, so we just sketched out the profile that we want in a part in a sketch, saved that to the library, saved it as in the Weldments profile folder that we saw from the downloads, and then we were able to easily integrate that into our assembly because it automatically appears when I go to create a structural member. And so that's how I can go and just really easily create Weldment profiles from within SOLIDWORKS without a whole lot of steps, and I can really add whatever I want to, so I shouldn't have to be using sweeps in situations where I want to create a Weldment. So that was all for that topic. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. This next session that we're going to cover is going to go over some SOLIDWORKS PDM permissions and 5 different types of PDM permissions. So let's go ahead and jump into that. And I actually want to start recording. So you guys are going to see something appear on my screen real quick. we're just getting a cleaner recording so you guys can get better quality YouTube videos up here. Okay, so what we're going to cover now, we are going to cover what different types of permissions are available in SOLIDWORKS PDM. So in SOLIDWORKS PDM, the permissions are really like the stop and go signs. They would allow you to check out files. They would allow you to have certain rights to select certain buttons, run certain tasks. There are a lot of permissions within SOLIDWORKS PDM, and actually there are 5 types of permissions that we're going to be covering within PDM, and we're going to see how these can affect me when I'm working within SOLIDWORKS. So there are 5 different types of permissions. There are admin permissions. There are admin permissions, which allow us to administrate the PDM vault and different permissions that are vault-wide. There are folder permissions. These folder permissions give us permissions for a specific folder. There are transition permissions, which tell us what transitions we can and can't use and how we can use them within SOLIDWORKS. There are state permissions, which tell us what we can do with certain files and certain states. And then there are file permissions, so just permissions specific to each file. And most of these have components that maybe there are unique permissions for PDM Pro, but there are permissions for admin, folder, transition, state, and file for both PDM Standard and PDM Pro. So all of these permissions exist both within PDM Standard and PDM Pro, and I'll be sure to specify when a specific permission is only PDM Professional. So the first thing we want to cover are the admin permissions. So the purpose of admin permissions is to control the access to the admin tool, control access to what a person can do with managing users, managing data cards, managing workflows, if they have to give comments or not. And so there are several admin permissions that are available with PDM. So this screenshot is of a PDM Pro Vault, and these are all the admin permissions that are available here. And so if you're in PDM Standard, you may see a few different permissions here. But here are some common permissions that we see affect people when they don't have the admin permission. So if you're in PDM Pro, you have the ability to run tasks. And tasks are little things that get little macro type situations done within our PDM Vault. And you need to have the permission to run the task if you want this person to be able to go ahead and run a task working within PDM. Then there are some administrating add-ins, templates. These are pretty self-explanatory, what we can do within the admin tool. Can they update columns or cold storage in the admin tool? Can they update history comments? So this would actually be going into a SOLIDWORKS file and modifying the history that a certain file has in it. And there's also a can purge history option. This is available in PDM Standard and PDM Pro. So it's information on whether this person can go in and actually modify the history of a file. Update license keys. These are all just options that you have within your SOLIDWORKS PDM admin tool. Can update search favorites. So if you've ever used the SOLIDWORKS PDM tool, you know that you have searches that you can perform in the search tool. And giving them options to add to favorites or update favorites allows them to create these favorites and maybe create a search that would allow them to search for those specific files or anything along those lines. Updating report queries. We're actually going to talk about reports a little bit later, but if you want to be running reports in your PDM tool, you need to have this permission. Toolbox settings is an admin permission, normally people have a toolbox administrators group, and they give specific people the ability to configure their toolbox. So not everybody in your PDM Vault is going in and making changes to the toolbox, which everybody shares. Can see the admin tool, whether or not they can log into that admin tool, whether or not they have to enter state change comments. So when you go and make a state change on a part, if you have this box checked, you have to make a comment before you can change the state on the. Like having this checked, because now we know people aren't just rushing through the state changes, they're purposefully making the state changes and they know why they're making that specific change. Same with version comments. I've seen this logged on and off. I like having it there for specific versions. You can also do specific versions in specific states. This just allows us to make sure that when people are making a unique version, they're really purposefully knowing what they went in and what information they're putting into the vault. And then finally, if you want to lock a user out of PDM, you would select this refuse login admin permission, and this permission would lock them out of the vault, and when they signed in, it would give them an error that they couldn't log into the vault. So these are some examples of admin permissions. The help.solidworks.com does have a full list of every single one of these, which ones are for pro, which ones are for standard. I'm going to pull that up for you. Which ones are for pro, which ones are for standard, and what the actual permission leads to, but I gave you the overview and what permissions I see affecting PDM the most. All right, the next type of permissions we're going to cover are folder permissions. So these permissions are what a specific user can do in regards to a specific folder. So if we go into a SOLIDWORKS group, so we're in our engineering group, we tag down to folder permissions and we select a folder, in the situation, the project folder. I can specify whether a user can complete specific actions within this folder. The only ones that are PDM Pro specific are may see files before initial check-in, which is in a private state, and we'll talk a little bit about private state files. Named bills materials, just because that's not available in PDM Standard, and then share files to another folder because that's not available in PDM Standard, but the rest of these are all available in both PDM Pro and PDM Standard. So we have activate a computed BOM. If we want a user to be able to activate a computed BOM, I didn't give my engineering permissions in this project folder, but I do want them to be able to add or rename files to this folder. Maybe not files in every state, but I do want them to be able to add files in this project's folder. So I gave them add or rename file, but I didn't get them add or rename folder. So maybe I have tasks that create my folders, or maybe I have admins who are the only ones who can create new projects, but I didn't give them the add or rename folder permission. Assign file permissions, we're going to take a look at this at the last section, but file permissions can actually cause some pretty messy things in your vault. So I like to keep these turned off, but we'll look at when this is allowed and when this isn't. Same with assigned group memberships. It can just get your vault really messy. So if you want someone to have assigned file permissions, make sure you're doing it really deliberately and make sure you know which users have those permissions. Overwrite versions during check-in. If they want to overwrite their previous version, I would probably restrict to only certain states. I give them permissions to check out a file, delete a file, so if they've added a file, they can delete it. Delete a folder, so maybe a project needs to be deleted, they can delete the folder, but I didn't give them permission to destroy a folder. So in SOLIDWORKS PDM, we have a recycling bin. So if I right-click and hit Properties, there is this deleted items folder here. I don't have anything in deleted items there. Let's go up to my top level. So I go to Properties, deleted items. I have all these files in my deleted items. These are files that people have right-clicked on and hit delete, and most of them are deleted by admin. Only certain people should have the right to actually destroy them. What this does, delete takes them out of the vault, nobody can see them. Destroy removes them from the archive server and basically burns them forever. You cannot get this file back. So with the destroy command, I suggest that admins go through and modify the destroy command, or go ahead and destroy files once every month, but I'd really suggest a specific person go and destroy these files so we don't accidentally delete a file forever that was needed for an assembly or for another part. We allow them to edit folder card data, so put in those properties that PDM is responsible for keeping track of, not version-free variable data, may see files before initial check-in or in private state. So this is if a file hasn't been checked in, it's just sitting locally on your machine. This is what gives them permission to see those files. I gave them permission to move files in between folders, so maybe I accidentally put it in full scale when I wanted it to be in subscale 8. I can go ahead and move that file to that folder. Read file contents is a very important permission to have. If the user does not have read file contents in a folder, they will not be able to see anything in the folder regardless of the other permissions they have. They need to be able to read the files in that folder in order to see them. And most of the time, I'm going to jump past a few. They need to be able to see the working versions of those files. Non-working versions are anything that has a revision on it. So if you're in a file that was just revised, that's a non-working version. Everything else is a working version of a file. So if you can't see working versions of a file, you won't be able to see files that maybe you're modifying or anything like that. So you want to make sure read file contents and for most of the time show working versions is checked. In this vault, I don't have any cold storage, so I don't have that checked. I don't like to give a lot of people permissions for the rollback command just because that involves destroying files out of the vault, and it can be really dangerous at times to give people those rollback command prompts. So normally this is only for managers or admins. What a rollback does is it takes the file maybe from revision C, rolls it back to revision B, and deletes everything that happened between revision B and revision C. Recover files from recycling bin. So along with that recycling bin I talked about earlier, I can go and recover a file if I accidentally deleted it and I didn't mean to. I want people to be able to do that because I gave them permission to delete. If they accidentally delete, I want them to be able to recover it. Share a file to another folder. Sharing is just a way to kind of keep your vault a little bit cleaner. If you want to share a file, maybe you want to have a set of documentation in every specific file, but you don't want 50 versions of this one file. You can actually share that file there, so it's always there, but you don't have one of those files for every single project. And I already covered show working versions. So folder permissions ask for a specific folder. So I can go in and pick a folder and it will give me permissions for those folders. But these go along with some other permissions. So transition permissions affect what we're allowed to do when working in the SOLIDWORKS workflow, what transitions we're allowed to take. So I've opened up my engineers again and I'm at their transition permissions. And I'm deciding when they're allowed to, what they're allowed to do in different transitions. So in this create ECO transition, so that if I take a look at my workflow, I have a transition called create ECO going from an approved and process an ECO to create a new revision of that file. So I can permit them to use it. Right now I don't have permit here. Maybe I only want managers to be able to create a new ECO. But some other options are disallow sequential state changes. So what that means is, say I was going from work in process to initial part to working approval, and I have the ability to go through both with to initial part review to working approval, and I have permissions. I have permit selected in both of these. What disallow sequential state changes does is it doesn't allow me to go straight from one to another. Someone else has to review my work in order for me to move on to the next level. It's just another check to make sure people aren't sending their files all the way through with nobody else touching them or nobody else looking at them. And then must enter state change comments. We saw that earlier in the admin permissions as well, but this is a way you can do it for only specific states. So in the admin permissions, it's vault-wide. You have to enter state change comments regardless. In this one, maybe we only want a state change comment when you're going from awaiting total approval to approved, or going from initial part review to working approval. So maybe you only want to put that comment in certain spots. A lot of time I see it with like changes needed. You would want comments there. You can't just send it to changes needed and not tell me what changes are needed. So this would be a good spot to must enter state change comments. All right, and that's our transition permissions. Now we're going to jump to state permissions. State permissions tell us what we're allowed to do when a file is in a specific state in the vault. So if I'm looking at my workflow, each of these different pieces is a state, and each of these states have specific permissions that I'm allowed to look at within PDM. So when I'm looking at my state permissions for my engineers, let's just focus on the work in process state. So I'm in my WIP state, and I have permission to add or rename files, check out files, delete files. And you may think, but wait, I already set those up in the folder permission. In order to check out a file in a specific state, you need permissions to check it out in the folder that it's in, so you need folder permissions, but you also need state permissions. So you need it in both spots. So you need permission to check out a file that's in that folder and permission to check out a file that's in that state. And a lot of times when we see people who are maybe having issues check out files, it's because they don't have the duplicity in the state and folder permissions. And that's a lot of times for check out file, rename file, read file contents is a real biggie. If you don't have read file contents in a specific state, you're not going to be able to see those files. Sometimes this read file contents is a good thing. Sometimes we don't want certain people to see work in process files. Maybe we don't want the people on the shop floor to see the work in process files. We only want them to be able to see files that have gone through the final revision. This is where we could uncheck read file contents for specific states. But same with delete, destroy. We covered most of these in the folder permissions, but these are just the workflow state side of these permissions. So remember, in order to do anything with a file, if I look at, for example, a file in my Rocket demo vault, so I'm looking at my vault, go into projects, I go into this. In order for me to see this airframe part, which I can, view the file and awaiting total approval, and permissions to view the file in the subscale 8 folder. If I didn't have permissions on those files, so let's go in, I'm logged in as the admin. It's in awaiting total approval. And I'm going to take away my ability to read the file contents in that state. go back, go into subscale 8. Just 1 second. I shouldn't have permission to see the file and awaiting total approval. So what I need to do is I need to go in and I need to go into my admin permissions and I need to look at my state permissions, look at awaiting total approval, and give myself permission to read the file contents. And once I can read the file contents, hit OK, go here. I can see the files in that state. So if you're ever working within a vault and you notice that there are certain files you just can't see, go ahead and check out which state they're in and make sure you have the ability to read and check out the files in that state. The last type of permissions isn't in the admin tool, and this is probably the trickiest type of permission. I alluded to them earlier in the folder permissions, and these are file permissions. So file permissions are actually defined when you go into a file. Remember, we had the user permissions can update file-specific permissions. But if I go to the file, right-click, and hit Properties, I get this file permissions dialog, and I can only allow certain groups to see the file. Most of the time, I do not like to do this. There's also a way in the admin tool to say any file created by any specific user. So if I look at my settings, pull up, there we go. So if I look here and I see all the permissions I was talking about before, but if I look at my options and assign folder permissions, permissions per file, pardon me, I can say that only users from like the manufacturing group are allowed to see files created by the admin. And what this can do, this can lead to a lot of problems because now I don't have any way to identify those problems and undo this vault-wide. Once I create a file, only manufacturing can see it unless someone with change file permissions actually goes in and switches this to everybody can see this file. So this can be really difficult when you're going through and only certain people can see files and you know you've given them all the permissions and you know everybody has read file content permissions and what they need to see, but they're still not seeing the file. Log in as admin and see if maybe this box is checked for the file. Now this can be difficult if you want to search through your whole vault and see if any files are missing there. And that brings me up to something else I alluded earlier, which was SQL queries. So I've created a SQL query that allows you to search for any files that have that file permission box checked. And I can go in, I can find it, and I can remove it if I need to. So let's say I'm in my Rocket Demo Vault and I run this query. And it says that the casing file in Subscale 5 CAD has some file-specific permissions. So I'm going to go to Project, Subscale 5, CAD, look at the casing file. So right-click, Properties, File Permissions, And lo and behold, only all users in engineering can see these files. So someone maybe in management that wasn't in the all users group for some reason isn't able to see this file. I don't want this to happen, so I'm going to check allow everyone to see the file, hit apply, and now when I run my query, I don't have any files that have individual file permissions. So I find this really useful in order to find those files, and you can use SQL queries in PDM Standard and PDM Pro. And if you guys want a copy of that query, go ahead and leave me a comment, and I can send that over to you so that you have the ability to search for any files done by local file permissions. And those are the types of permissions in SOLIDWORKS PDM. So we covered admin permissions, which are vault-wide. So maybe if I want people to have to make a comment vault-wide rather than specifying it in a state or for a specific folder, I would set it in the admin permissions. Folder permissions specify what permissions I have to do for a specific folder. So if I want to be able to see files in the folder, I need to be able to read the file contents in that folder. Transition permissions allow me to transition the file to another state, and they also prevent people from running one file all the way through a workflow without anybody else checking their work. State permissions allow me to see files in specific states and allow you to take a look at that and make sure that you have read file contents in whatever specific state you're working with. And finally, file permissions allow you to look at a specific file and actually tag on or off whether it's been set up so only certain groups can see that. And I have a SQL query that will allow you to search if any of these have accidentally gotten tacked on in your role. All right, that's what we had for our PDM section today. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them into the chat. I mentioned this last month, but I do want to talk about, let me just stop the recording real quick. I mentioned this last month, but I do want to talk about the options you guys have to get training in SOLIDWORKS. So we're offering 20% off of our training, offer ending July 19th. And you can look at classes and go ahead and use the code GETTRAINED to get some SOLIDWORKS training. I'm actually training a simulation class in the mornings this past week. And I have quite a few more simulation classes coming up. So maybe if you join with one of those, I'll get to see you guys. But for any training, go ahead and use the code GETTRAINED by July 19th, and you can get 20% off a Fisher Unitech training class. All right, and I'm going to look for any questions. There's a lot of chats for the requesting that link, so I'm just sorting through those. So someone has a question. In file permissions list, there's an admin listed as a group that could exclude from viewing files in existence. If this is the case, how does the admin fix that scenario? So in SOLIDWORKS PDM, as long as you have a check mark here, so if you have a check mark in any of these, so admin has everything but state change comments, regardless of whether my group does or doesn't have it, so maybe if I look at my subsystem leads group, they don't have all of those admin permissions. Regardless of the fact that my group has it, as long as my admin has a check here, they're going to be able to see that. So you just want to make sure your admin has full permissions everywhere, and it doesn't matter what group they're in. In general, I advise leaving the admin out of any groups so there's no overwrite issue. Obviously, I didn't take my own advice here just so I could show what's happening. Actually, I pulled him out. So he's not even a member of that subsystem lead. But normally I suggest leaving the admin out of any groups so that doesn't happen. But if he is, as long as he has those check marks, he should be able to see any file. So just go through, and honestly, what I like to do is just check all of them, go into the admin, check all for state, except for version comments, check all for permissions, and don't do any of these, and just make sure that he has everything there. All right. So someone wants to know how to copy permissions from one folder to another. Unfortunately, that's not really there's not really a great process for doing that. So if I'm in folder permissions and I want whichever permissions are an automatic toolbox or to also be in common parts, there's really not the option to do that. There are a few SQL hacks that you can take to do them, but I don't want to get into just on today's webinar. But as far as copying them from one folder to another, you really don't have that option just out of the box in the SOLIDWORKS tool. All right. Any other questions, guys? I'm just getting a notepad so I can make sure I have everybody I need to send that information to. I see another question that just came in. I'm going to get that in just a second. I'm just copying over these emails. Okay, is there any way to copy permissions from one group to another? So if I go to create a new group, I can copy permissions from one group. If it's an already created group, once again, you need to, so if I want to create a new group called new group, and I wanted them to have all the same permissions as subsystem leads, I could copy the permissions or the members here. And then they're going to have all of the permissions that that subsystem leads has. Otherwise, there's not a direct copy, but you could go into SQL and copy the table information, but that could get a little messy. But at least when you create a new group, you can do that automatically. All right. Any other questions or anybody else want that SQL query? Okay, guys. So our next Straight from Support episode is going to be, I'm gonna look at my calendar real quick. It's going to be August 21st. So August 21st is going to be our next episode of Straight from Support. I believe we have special guest Pierre Larson talking about some interesting information in PDM. And I'm going to take a look at some support. I think I'm going to cover something about sheet metal as well. I have one more question. Someone would like a dedicated webinar for custom weldments. We can definitely look into that. We can also look into some blogs that we can get you so you have that information. An old state that's no longer used that has some files in the vault. Removing the state from the workflow isn't really possible without deleting all the files out of that state. You actually saw in my, let me pull up my admin tool, because I actually have an example of this in my design workflow. I have a state that's no longer used. So this assemb temp. I have a state here that's no longer used, but at one point in time, a file went through it. So I just kind of leave it off to the side. Now, when you're working in PDM standard, this can get a bit annoying. I've seen people rename the state and just go ahead and use it as something else, but that can get confusing when working in PDM. There is a way to go into SQL, take anything that's in there, move it to a different state, and then you should be able to delete that file, but that's not out-of-the-box functionality, and we could send you information on that if you call into support and ask about it, but it would definitely be a support case to get you up and running on that, just because it's messing with your SQL tables. We want to make sure that's all done right. All right, if you guys have any questions, you can definitely call into support, especially the person with the question about the deleted workflow state. But if any of you guys have any questions, please call into support, and I'd love to chat with you. Thank you guys for coming out to the webinar. I hope you enjoyed today's topics, and I will see you next month. Have a great day, guys.